I also wanted to talk a little bit about this idea, which we already mentioned briefly, of the value of the shoe itself.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, because and this is part of going back to that scene we just mentioned, but I think that the theme of the movie, generally speaking, there's this theme: a shoe is just a shoe until someone steps in it. I think that's good in a lot of ways, because there are, and I think it is important to talk about that, like, as much as sometimes it can be tedious to dress a certain way or to look a certain way or to have a certain kind of social expectation to wear whatever color or whatever suit is appropriate, or shoes, or, don't wear sandals in the church, for example. Sometimes we're like, oh, that's stupid, that's ridiculous. But like, there's something to be said about like clothing. There's certain appropriate settings that kind of add or take away certain values, inform or disinform a situation. And what's interesting about this particular line, this particular shoe, is that a clothing line, a brand, became valuable, or I should say the branch of a brand became valuable because of a person attached to it. And that oftentimes the material world, here now taking the example of a shoe, actually tells us something deeper. There's just kind of like lens, right? And maybe I'm stretching this theme out a little bit, but I think it's important to always remember that as important as the shoe is, or as cool as it comes out, or whatever new color or whatever new design comes out of these shoes, this shoe particularly, but just shoes in general or clothing in general, like, these are mere means. Like, even at its best, clothing, as much as we can get fascinated or spend so much money on it, to anybody who may have like a purchasing maybe addiction, or has just buys a lot of things and kind of places their identity in clothing, there's actually something deeper to what's going on here, right? Because if you dress a certain way or you do a certain thing, it tells us a lot about you, right? And that's actually one of the big mottos in like custom designing. It's like, actually what you wear tells us a lot about who you are, right? Like a cassock says something about me. Or the collar says something about Joey, the clerical shirt, or whatever. Like the collar says something about what we do, who we are, or what we're at least aspiring to be. In the same way, like a shoe tells us about something, or because I also know, for example, and I'm just drawing this out because I know, and I remember, and I know this is a big thing in like high schools, right? Like the shoes you wear says a lot about your social status, right? And if you don't have a certain shoe, then it tells us something about you. And that's true, but also kind of balancing that with like, yeah, but it's not all about the clothing too, and it's about the value of the person. So
yeah, so let me just, I like this conversation. So like I'm thinking out loud here, but like clothing, shoes, it's meaningful, like it signifies something, which is why one of the corporal works of mercy is to clothe the naked. It's like it does bestow dignity on someone to clothe them, and yeah, like there's a reason we dress up, for example, to go to mass. It's because certain occasions,
to
weddings, right, to merit clothing that say something. But what's fascinating to me about continuing this train of thought is, you said the significance of the shoe is great because of the person who wears it. So that's the big theme of the movie. And what was cool about the movie itself is that, so the precedent before this, I mentioned this at the beginning when I was giving the overview, but like a shoe had never been branded specifically for one individual person before. So like Magic Johnson and Converse, or Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, they both wore Converse shoes, but the Converse shoe was it was a stock shoe. Like it looked the same. And basically the idea was Magic Johnson and Larry Bird really were given the privilege of wearing the shoe, of wearing the brand, right? And then other people, because these guys wore that brand, would theoretically be incentivized to also wear that brand, because that, like, we're going to be like Magic and Larry. We're going to wear Converse shoes. Well, with Michael, what they did was they said, no, we don't want you to get absorbed into the brand and you just to become another representative of our brand. We want our brand to be a representative of you. We want you to become the focal point. The shoe, we're designing it around you. They even, this was fascinating. I'd heard this before. There was a standard in the NBA that your shoe had to be 51% white, right? It had to be majority white. If you had a shoe on during a basketball game that was less than 51% white, it was too colorful, in other words, the NBA would fine you $5,000. Part of what Nike did to show how much they valued Michael Jordan was they agreed, even though they didn't really have the budget for it, they designed him the first Air Jordan that was mostly red and black. So it was against against NBA's regulations, but they agreed to pay the fine every single game that Michael Jordan wore the shoe, because they wanted the center of attention to be on him. And what's interesting is the idea then, it's different. It's not like, I want to buy this shoe, for the Nike customers. It's not like, I want to buy this shoe to be a part of this brand. It's, I want to wear this shoe so I can be like that guy.
Yeah.
Right? It's like Michael Jordan is, again, he's divine. He's the deity. He's immortal. He's the legend. And so now
when use words like eternal.
Right, exactly. And so now when there's these kids, and this is still the case today, I mean, there's these kids, these people who they feel like when they step into Jordan's shoes, when they clothe themselves with Jordan, if you will, they get to become like Mike. They get to participate in his greatness by wearing the shoes that he's wearing. Yeah. Right. And how interesting this is. I'm thinking of St. Paul right now, of clothe yourselves with Christ. Right. So
put on the helmet of salvation, or the armor of salvation, and the helmet.
Exactly. So like all these things that took place, and this is going to be my ultimate point, my ultimate takeaway. It's like we have this tendency to deify these athletes, these celebrities, and that is exactly what happened in the life of Michael Jordan. And the same kind of religious movements in the human heart that are operative on this natural level, like, athletic fans worshiping Michael Jordan as a god, athletic fans wanting to clothe themselves with Michael Jordan by putting on his shoes. Those same dynamics are present in a supernatural way and in a real way with the man who truly is God when it comes to our relationship with Christ. He is not someone who we deify. He is the deity himself. He is God. And we are called to participate in that divinity by clothing ourselves with him through baptism, through the sacraments. So that's just one line of thinking that stood out to me throughout this movie.
That's insightful, Joey. I think that's very well said. I also, in addition to that, or kind of just to add to that a little bit, there's that Matthew Marr, the creative of the shoe.
Oh, right?
Yeah. So remember that guy? So basically, this guy was
awesome.
He was incredible. He's kind of one of the masterminds behind this. I think in the movie is Peter Moore, but he played this kind of genius under the basement designer of the Nike shoe, right? And so they kind of went to him, like Sonny and Rob were like, "Hey, we need you to design the shoe, and we need these things." And you had this kind of, again, this creative genius in the basement, like, "Okay, I know what to do. We got to make the shoe about him, everything about him."
Yeah.
Top to bottom, we got to make it unique. And this is kind of what Joey's saying. It's like before, you had Converse as like the general brand. Everybody had it, but they all looked the same. And in fact, that's still one of the popularity of Converse. It's like they're still very similar.
That's right.
And they're kind of a classy shoe. I think they're the classic shoe in American history. But nevertheless, in this case, they wanted to mold the Nike Jordan, the Air Jordan around Michael Jordan. But I do think it's important in what Joey's talking about. There was a deep philosophy intertwined with the creation of this shoe, right? Because it's not just like, oh, there's this cool shoe, let's stick some red on it, let's stick a little Nike, let's put a little brand on it that says his name, Air Jordan or whatever. It wasn't just like a whatever unthoughtful project. It took a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of creativity, and a lot of philosophy. And in fact, the whole idea behind it was to build a soul and a form around what was happening to fit and be molded around the person of Michael Jordan. And so there's this kind of stamp of uniqueness with
individualism,
individualism, right? And you still see that, right? So like the person who wears the Air Jordan still tries to stand out. Like that's the whole idea with it. It's like you want to be the guy wearing the Air Jordan. You want to be the guy clothed, to use Joey's terms here, clothed in the garbs of Jordan, and to be kind of take on that persona. But it's not an unintentional, it's not an irrational project. It's actually deeply, deeply informed by ideas that kind of come from the basement and work their way up into reality, right? Things that are kind of in the dark, unseen, but really guiding the project that now comes to light, and we are now living in and experiencing and maybe wearing ourselves right now. and that there's just like kind of resurgence. And yeah, I think there's something deep about what you're saying, Joey, and I think that kind of this idea of creativity and philosophy coming together, there's a deep kind of play in the movie, and I don't think it's a far stretch to say that, personally.
No, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, that's the presupposition of this podcast that we're doing, is that ideas have consequences.
Right.
And it was, in fact, the philosophy of the people working at Nike, that guy who created the shoe. It was his ideas that ultimately created the multi-billion-dollar consequences of the Jordan brand as we know it today.